With the new escalation of buffs update, the meta has been completely shaken up, and with that, so have tier lists. And this is my foray into a bug tier list for support weapons, and we're going to be checking out which ones are S tier and which ones are absolutely pointless and don't bother. Of course, these are just my opinions, and as always in all my videos, folks, let's keep the comments constructive down below. You most likely will have a differing opinion to me, and I'm actually really interested to know what you guys think about my thoughts. So let's get straight into it. First up, we're going to look at the Railgun, and I'm going to place this one as a marker for the rest of the batch. We're going to put this straight into S tier. Now, the Railgun against bugs is no slouch at all, folks. It is one of the best weapons you can take, particularly if you take it with a supply pack. It can 3-shot Bile Titans if you manage to get headshots with 90% charge, and it can also 2-shot a charger with 90% charge. There's a caveat there in that you need to be getting over that 90% charge in unsafe mode, and obviously that puts you in that danger bracket, and it does take some practice to get to a point where you're able to do that efficiently, but oh my word, it is totally worth it, folks. And alongside that, you can also pull it out against alpha commanders one-shotting their heads, and you can also one-shot spewer enemies, which I think is an absolute must-take in my opinion if you're coming up against those suckers. And for me, it just feels like one of the must picks there. It's been strong throughout its life, but at the moment it's really in a top spot. Just to move on very quickly, we're now going to set our marker at the bottom of the tier list, and we are going to be taking our friend the Airburst. Folks, I do not like this weapon at all. I think it's a complete waste of time. It just causes more trouble than it's worth. I'm putting it in don't bother because 99.9% of the time I've seen this used, it ends up causing destruction in all the wrong ways. Don't get me wrong, you can do some really cool stuff with it, and I've seen people work amazing shots into patrols and alleviate breaches with it, but it's few and far between. You might be more skilled than me perhaps, folks. In fact, that's probably not a hard thing to do. This for me is just a no-go. It doesn't do anything useful and backfires quite often, and I don't know what you think, chat. Chat is saying it's a troll weapon. It feels very much like a meme weapon. Next up, we're going to move into the MGs, and we're going to start with the smallest of the three, the Stalwart. Now, this one takes a little bit more discussion and thought, and something that I love about the Stalwart and have loved about it since the Eruptor came into the game actually, is the way that you can kind of play the primary and support weapon set up in reverse. You can use the Stalwart as your primary and use things like your Eruptor to get the heavies down, shooting bile spewers from distance and that kind of stuff. And you can also use the Stalwart as an excellent form of chaff clear, and I find running this with a supply pack, maybe another sentry, Gatling barrage, and really leaning into removing the terminid threat in terms of chaff is a great way to play this. I don't think it's particularly good when you start breaking it down in terms of whether it's useful against heavy targets. I mean, you can get behind charges and do work to them, and you can shoot an impaler in the face, and stalkers fold quite quickly to this, but I do think that when you start to consider it for its whole value, that we do start to see it slip down the list slightly. It's a very fun weapon to use, and for that reason, I would be inclined to put it probably around mid to low B at the moment. If we go with the larger choice, the MG43, this too kind of, for me, can lie between A and B tier. I do use it a lot more than the Stalwart now, and if you use the MG43 in a map with bile spewers, and one of those maps where you just get a serious presence of things like alpha commanders, you do find that this comes into its own and really sort of rocks the boat against terminids. It's definitely better than it used to be by a long shot, and since the update, it's doing serious work. Is it going to be that weapon that you are always going to pick? If you pushed me to put my top 5 support weapons into a list, it probably wouldn't be in the top 5 if I'm being completely brutally honest. So I am going to put this in B tier again, above the Stalwart, because I think it is more useful. If you get behind chargers and get shots on vulnerable spots, whether it be the charger's back or its leg. It does much quicker work. It fills the support weapon role more than the Stalwart does, but it's definitely a highly efficient weapon if you want to lean into that kind of rapid fire swashbuckling machine gun style of play, 100%. And then moving on to the largest of the three, we've got the MG206, and this weapon for me, before escalation of buffs, you can of course absolutely shred a charger vulnerable spot with this weapon, and I do believe it's now in a better spot in some ways with that regard, but there was of course the shadow nerfs that have now since been acknowledged by Arrowhead, and I do think that actually it's pulled it down ever so slightly. I don't think that I would be inclined to put this any higher in the tier list other than another B. The argument here is it better than the MG43? It's better than the Stalwart, but is it better than the MG43? The ammo capacity, for me, is a massive problem. The fact that you have to stop moving, much like the MG43, is also a massive problem for this weapon, and that really, for me, hinders its value. And with the shadow nerfs that have been put in, I think that they are unnecessary. I feel like Arrowhead just can't help themselves sometimes, and it does still work well against bile spewers, and it does still work well against big groups of chaff. With that in mind, I'm going to put it below the MG43. I'm going to keep the MG43 towards the top of B tier and sandwich it between the Stalwart and that weapon. Another reason why I'm putting this below the MG43 is the fact that the nerfs changed the damage it does to durable spots. So the durable damage being changed doesn't really make much sense to me for a weapon that's supposed to be an absolutely massive machine gun. It's supposed to rip through heavy targets. You are already being penalized for using that weapon due to the ammo capacity. Now, everyone's favorite, the autocannon. I absolutely love the autocannon. It's one of the most balanced and best performing weapons in the game. Arrowhead have even acknowledged that themselves. I agree with them. I think this is such a great weapon to use, and when you've got peak physique armor on, it just feels incredible. It's going in S tier. I love to pair this with a blitzer. As soon as you see an alpha commander, you switch, you one-tap the alpha commander, and because you're using peak physique, you've just got so much control over the stability. You've got a great big group of spore spewers pushing your position. There's 5 of them lined up. You just mag dump into them, and they just all explode. It's absolutely glorious. Is it as good as the Railgun? I don't think so. I think it's definitely below the Railgun. I feel like when you're using it against biles, I feel like when you're using it against chargers, it's just not quite there. Now, the AMR. This is a very interesting one in escalation of buffs. It has been increased in terms of its ability to deal with not only smallies, but it also now does work to chargers. The question, though, is, would you use it against bugs? I personally don't use this weapon against bugs purely because I just find the rate of fire and the way that it plays getting me overwhelmed a lot. I don't think the damage output and the AP warrants taking it over other weapons at the moment, because it just feels a little bit lackluster in that department. And I do find that when I use the AMR, it kind of feels a bit like when we first started playing the game after Escalation of Freedom, when we were just spending time running backwards, turning, shooting, running backwards, turning, shooting, jetpacking away, shooting. And that's a fun play style, don't get me wrong, but if I'm playing the AMR, it's certainly not against bugs. 2 people here saying the AMR is the best shotgun versus bugs, just don't scope in. So there we go, using it from the hip is a viable option. And also Mr. Goody Goody Gumdrops here with AMR hip fire is viable on bugs. So there's 2 people there. I have tried that and I have used it that way, but for me, folks, it just doesn't really marry up. So for that reason, I'm going to put this in low B tier. So the arc thrower, everyone's sweetheart. Everyone loved this thing back in the day, especially against bots, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about how it works against bugs. I absolutely adored this thing when the game first came out, and once they fixed all those annoying little janky things with it, I couldn't put the thing down. It was so good, and I was so excited when it came out with its buffs in escalation of buffs. I'm devastated, folks. I don't like it. I don't like how it performs. I feel like the fire rate really lets it down. And whilst the range increase and the conductivity increase and the way that it behaves is absolutely fantastic, I just don't like the fire rate and the way it feels and the conductivity and the way it jumps. I'm going to apologize to those arc thrower lovers, but man, I'm over him. I don't like it anymore. It's going in C tier for me. Much like the arc thrower offering itself up for more meme related builds, I think an honorable mention now needs to go to the newly added Steriliser. This thing was hilarious on launch day. I had a great time watching Crazy Mr. Pips spraying it all over chargers and watching them run into walls, and it was a great laugh. But really, when you think about it, is the Steriliser actually any good? You can create a few meme builds with it, but are you going to use it over other weapons? Of course you're not, folks. If we're being serious about this, it goes straight into don't bother. It's right next to the Airburst, and I'm actually laughing here because I'm wondering, in terms of the don't bother tier, which one do we put above the other? Is the Airburst more useful than the Steriliser, or is the Steriliser king here? Which one's better in terms of don't bother? I guess the thing with the Steriliser is it's probably more reliable than the Airburst. It actually does more stuff. It doesn't kill your teammates per se, although it can. I'm just wondering if it's worth us looking at this tier and putting the Steriliser above the Airburst. And in fact, now that I've said it out loud, let's do it. Let's put the Airburst below the Steriliser. The Airburst at the moment, folks, is officially the worst one in this tier list. Now, moving up to the other end of the tier list again, we're going to check out the Flamethrower. I don't think there's much conversation that's needed. The reverted damage, the changes they've made to this, the way that fire behaves in the game, it's had so much love. It's back to where it was. The 33% damage increase that got brought back in has just absolutely saved this weapon, and they listened to the community. We were up in arms when they changed this weapon for the worse, and now it's back for the better. It's going in S tier, and I think, folks, I'm going to put the Flamethrower at the top of the tier list because of the following things. Insane horde clear, whether you like to say it or not. Backpack on, supplies, funneling this thing. You just stand outside breaches and laugh at everything and melt them into oblivion. Chargers, absolutely deleted. Impalers, deleted. You can even, if you coordinate yourself, take down a Bile Titan. I know that's not the easiest thing in the world, but it just kind of exemplifies how strong this has become. If a number of you take a Flamethrower and start running around as a group, it's absolute insanity how strong this thing is. I don't think much else needs to be said other than this is absolutely S tier. Let's look at some of the anti-tank weapons. Let's look at the spear. Now, this weapon is a really interesting one. The sheer devastation it now causes at the drop of a hat is fantastic. However, there is a caveat with the spear. The ammo consumption is off the charts. It fires so quickly now, and it's so difficult to kind of keep that ammunition stocked. I think that although you can one-shot chargers, although you can one-shot Bile Titans with this, it very, very quickly runs out of ammo and very, very quickly becomes defunct. I was playing with this earlier on today off stream and just sort of experimenting with how it works in a non-coordinated team environment, and it's a nightmare, if I'm totally honest. It feels really tricky to manage it, and when you've got people throwing in supplies when you're not asking them for it and all that kind of stuff, you can find yourself bottlenecked a lot. And I think that's the problem this has. Given its purpose and given what it does, and given that the Recoilless Rifle is just better, I'm going to put it in low B. I'm going to put it right down at that end. So the other anti-tank, the Recoilless Rifle, it's going to come as no surprise based on what I've just said. The Recoilless Rifle is your premier choice of anti-tank weapon now. It just absolutely slaps. And again, I'm a sucker for talking about how things feel to play. I find the Recoilless Rifle, with its analog nature, just feels so good, and it's such a laugh. And when there's a couple of you running this, oh my word, devastation across the battlefield. And the way in which people have kind of embraced this since the changes and since the kind of shake-up has happened, it just feels really, really strong to use. And you delete heavies with no problem at all, and your teammates love you for it, folks. So without a doubt, it's going into S tier. Is it better than the autocannon? Yeah, I think it is now. Absolutely. Now, do I put it higher than the railgun and the flamethrower? This is where personal opinion comes in slightly. And if you know me and you watch the streams and you watch my content, I don't really play anti-tank weapons over non-backpack loadouts such as the railgun, the flamethrower. So with that in mind, that's the kind of toss-up I've got going on in my head now. Do I put it higher than the railgun? No, I don't. I don't think I do. I just find having a railgun and a supply pack on my back is more useful to the team. Is it better at anti-tank, the railgun? No, of course it isn't better, but it's more useful across the board. But that's where I'm going to place it, right bang in the middle of S tier, just above our friend the autocannon. The grenade launcher. It is so good at horde clear. You literally master the arc of the shot and fire it rapidly. You can shoot from the hip if you get good with it. You can clear out swathes of enemies, literally entire screens. And the way that this interacts in a squad setup that are working well with each other, if you've got people on anti-tank duty, you can just make things trivialized. It's one of those space making weapons, I like to call it. If you are set in the mindset that, okay, I am going to be more on horde clear duty than anyone else here, and that is my priority, and I need to keep people safe and keep enemy threats away from them as best I can, this weapon works brilliantly. I'm going to put this up in S tier. I'm going to put this below the autocannon purely because the autocannon is more useful. And as someone has just mentioned in the chat as well, actually, if you team fire this thing, it's an absolute beast. The autocannon dwarfs the grenade launcher in that regard. So that is why I'm placing it at the moment at the bottom of our S tier, folks. Laser maxing is one of my favorite pastimes at the moment in Helldivers 2, and we were just running some laser max setups on stream against terminids and bots, and what a blast it was, folks. The laser cannon is so good against bugs, and this gets compounded the more players that use it, and you can take bile titans out with this thing at the drop of a hat. You can melt their faces off. You throw gas grenades into a breach, and you've got chargers, you've got bile titans, you've got impalers, you've got all the smallies. Everything just folds, and if you equip this alongside another energy-based weapon, or two if you take the dagger as your sidearm, you can just rotate continuously without spending any ammo cartridges or magazines or batteries or whatever you want to call them, and you're just an absolute wrecking ball. With all the excitement and hype out of the way, if we look at this weapon subjectively, and if I'm completely honest and I take away my excitement, if I was running around solo with this thing, would it be one of my premier choices? Probably not. I don't think it's good in isolation compared to the other 5 we've got in S tier. Is it viable? Yes, 100%. It does great work against biospewers. It sets things on fire. It takes the heads off alpha commanders. It can take down chargers. It can take down bile titans. But is it that good compared to something like the railgun or the flamethrower or the recoilless? No, it's not. So I'm going to put this in A. The Quasar Cannon. Now, this thing absolutely slaps. You can one-shot headshot bile titans. You can one-shot headshot behemoths. You can do work to impalers. You can even pull it out when there's an alpha commander approaching you and take that out if you want to. Its regularity of fire is absolutely fine in my opinion, and I've always felt that even though they did nerf the cooldown, that it was always really strong in that regard anyway. The fact that you don't have any ammo for it and the fact you could just use it at the drop of a hat whenever you want to. Couple it with another energy weapon like a blitzer, couple it with the sickle, something like that, and a jetpack. Man, it's an absolute blast to play, and I've found myself using this more and more again since the update, and for that reason, I am absolutely putting this in S tier. Is it better than the grenade launcher? Yes, it is. Is it better than the autocannon? At the moment, against bugs, I think it is, folks. Is it better than the recoilless? Yes, it is. I think because of the infinite ammo it offers and the versatility that it offers us, it should be above the recoilless. Would I put it above the railgun? No, I wouldn't put it above the railgun, and I certainly wouldn't put it above the flamethrower. 2 more to go, folks, and we've left two partners in crime till last. We've got the Commando and the Expendable anti-tank. Doing your favorite Arnie impression, getting to that evac, getting to that chopper with the Commando is an absolute must try. But rose-tinted glasses off, what do we think about it? How does this perform against bugs? Is it S tier? Let's get this straight out of the way. No, it's not. Absolutely not. Is it B tier? Would you say it's more useful and better than, say, the AMR or the Stalwart? Yes, I would. So using that method, I would say I would place this firmly in A tier. I think that it's probably not as useful. I don't feel like dropping in weapons like the EAT and the Commando is anywhere near as effective as it used to be. It used to feel a lot calmer out there on the battlefield, so you had a bit more time to collect yourself. So for that reason, folks, I'm going to drop this at A. It works really well against things like Chargers, and it can work against Bile Titans and Impalers and blah, blah. It's fine. It's good. It works. It's just that ease of use that can catch you out sometimes that I'm not too happy with. So for that reason, I'm going to put this firmly in A tier. And I guess the question now is the Commando better than the Expendable anti-tank? Yeah, I think it is again. I do love the EAT, but I think whilst I'm placing this above the Expendable anti-tank, I do think that it is a bit of a side grade. I think that it's a matter of preference. There's not much in it, folks, but for me, I just like doing Arnie impressions on the battlefield. If you're interested in taking a deeper look into some more primary and support weapon combos for the hardest difficulty in Helldivers 2, including some of the weapons that I just mentioned there, check out this next video. It's got you covered. Take care of yourselves, keep having fun, and I'll see you in the next one.